Two of the greatest science fiction films ever made opened in theaters on the exact same day, and both of them flopped. Ridley Scott's Blade Runner and John Carpenter's The Thing hit theaters on June 25, 1982, and neither one made real money. The Thing had the added misfortune of following the single biggest movie of the entire decade by exactly 2 weeks. Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial had opened on June 11th, and America was still completely in love with it, a warm, hopeful story about a friendly alien and a lonely kid. 2 weeks later, Carpenter released a movie about a shape-shifting alien that turns human beings inside out, in a story where nobody can trust anyone, including themselves. Critics tore it apart. One major review called it instant junk. Audiences stayed away in droves. John Carpenter was so devastated by the reaction that Universal fired him from his next project and bought him out of his contract entirely. And yet this exact movie, the one called Pornographic Garbage in the summer of 1982, is now so influential that its fingerprints are on nearly every creature horror and paranoia film made since. This is the story of The Thing, and how becoming a flop was sometimes just the first chapter. As always, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button. This is the place of deep sci-fi, horror, and hybrid breakdown. If you've done that, let's begin. Set at a remote American research outpost in Antarctica, The Thing follows a small team of scientists who discover a shape-shifting alien organism that's been buried in the ice for over 100,000 years, and it's just woken up. The creature can perfectly imitate any living thing it absorbs, down to memories and mannerisms, meaning any single member of the 12-man crew could already be the monster wearing a human face, and neither the characters nor the audience can tell who. Kurt Russell plays Mac Reddy, a helicopter pilot who reluctantly ends up leading the group as paranoia tears them apart faster than the creature itself does. There's no reliable way to test who's still human, and every solution the team tries just makes the isolation and suspicion worse. It's less a monster movie in the traditional sense and more a pressure cooker about the collapse of trust, set somewhere so remote that calling for help was never actually an option to begin with. By the time the film's now legendary blood test scene happens roughly halfway through, the real subject has already become unmistakably clear. It was never really about the alien. It was about what isolation and suspicion do to people trapped together with nowhere left to run. The Thing is based on Who Goes There?, a 1938 novella by John W. Campbell Jr., and it's actually the second film adaptation of that same story. The first was 1951's The Thing from Another World, produced by Howard Hawks. Carpenter's version is widely considered the more faithful adaptation of the two, closer in tone and structure to Campbell's original paranoia-driven concept than the earlier film ever attempted to be. By 1982, Carpenter had already built a genuine reputation with Halloween, The Fog, and Escape from New York, all made largely outside the studio system on tight independent budgets. The Thing was different. It was his first true studio picture, made for Universal. And it was also the most expensive film he'd directed up to that point, with a budget of roughly $15 million. Screenwriter Bill Lancaster built the script around Campbell's central premise but sharpened the claustrophobia considerably, trapping the entire story at one remote outpost with no way out and no one to call. For Carpenter, this was supposed to be the moment his independent horror instincts finally met real studio resources, the culmination of nearly a decade of work. Bringing the creature to life fell to Rob Bottin, who was only 22 years old at the time and had trained under legendary effects artist Stan Winston, who quietly contributed to a handful of shots himself without asking for any credit. What Bottin and his team built went far beyond typical monster suit work of the era. The Thing needed to convincingly split apart, fuse with other bodies, and reform into entirely new, wrong-looking shapes, sometimes multiple times within a single scene. Some of these transformation sequences remain among the most technically ambitious practical effects ever attempted on film, built from a mix of animatronics, prosthetics, and materials designed to behave like something between flesh and liquid on camera. Cinematographer Dean Cundy shot the film largely on freezing sound stages built to mimic the brutal cold of Antarctica, with additional location work in the snow of British Columbia, and the physical toll of the shoot on cast and crew alike was significant. Actors spent long stretches genuinely freezing on set to sell the isolation the story needed. The effects work alone reportedly consumed a substantial share of the entire budget, a level of investment in practical creature work rarely attempted at this scale before. Kurt Russell, already a repeat Carpenter collaborator after Elvis and Escape from New York, plays Macready, alongside Keith David, Wilford Brimley, and Charles Hallahan. Rounding out the Outpost's small, tightly wound crew. What makes the ensemble work is how quietly each character gets established early on, a brief line here, a specific mannerism there, so that once the paranoia sets in, the audience actually has something real invested to lose. For the score, Carpenter brought in Ennio Morricone, one of the most celebrated composers in film history, best known for lush, sweeping orchestral work across decades of cinema. What Morricone delivered for The Thing was almost the complete opposite of his usual style, minimal pulsing. Unsettling passages that sound closer to a heartbeat than a melody, reportedly shaped heavily by Carpenter's own direction toward something starker and more restrained. Editor Todd Ramsey pushed back whenever Carpenter second-guessed how bleak the film was becoming, encouraging him to commit fully to the darkness rather than soften it for a wider audience. Every one of these choices, taken alone, was a genuine strength. Together, in the summer of 1982, they added up to a movie that simply refused to be comfortable. The Thing opened in US theaters on June 25, 1982, the exact same day as Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, and just 2 weeks after Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial had become a genuine cultural phenomenon nationwide. Carpenter later put it bluntly in interviews, 2 weeks before his movie came out, E.T. arrived and the entire country fell in love with it, during a period of real economic hardship when audiences badly wanted something hopeful to hold on to. Then his film showed up, and by his own description, it was the exact opposite of E.T. in almost every conceivable way, bleak, grim, and entirely uninterested in offering anyone comfort. The summer of 1982 was stacked well beyond just those two films. With Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, Poltergeist, Conan the Barbarian, An Officer and a Gentleman, and Fast Times at Ridgemont High all competing for the exact same audience within weeks of one another. A grim, gory Antarctic horror film about paranoia and distrust was never going to be what people wanted to see 2 weeks after falling in love with a lonely kid and his alien best friend. Critics did not hold back. The New York Times called it foolish and depressing, describing the human cast as little more than props to be mutilated for shock value, and dismissed the whole film outright as instant junk. Time magazine wrote it off as an exercise in abstract art, intended as an insult rather than a compliment. Roger Ebert, reviewing it at the time, called it a bath-bag movie, arguing the characters existed purely to be attacked by the creature rather than to matter as people in their own right. Reports from early screenings describe audience members physically walking out mid-film, unable to stomach the visual intensity of Bottin's effects work up on the big screen. Almost every major review from that summer agreed on one specific thing: the practical effects had gone too far, crossing from suspense into pure gratuitous excess. It's a genuinely rare thing for a film's single greatest technical achievement to be treated as its most damning flaw, but that's exactly what happened to The Thing throughout the summer of 1982, from nearly every major outlet at once. On a budget of roughly $15 million, The Thing brought in only around $20 million worldwide, once prints and advertising costs are factored into that math, a film that effectively lost Universal money on their biggest creature horror investment to date. The fallout for Carpenter personally was immediate and severe. He was fired from directing Firestarter, his next planned project adapting a Stephen King novel, and Universal bought him out of the multi-picture deal he'd signed with the studio not long before. Carpenter later said he was labeled a pornographer of violence in the press at the time, and admitted years afterward that he simply hadn't taken the public's taste into account when making it the way he did. He went on to keep working steadily throughout the 80s regardless, directing Christine, Starman, and Big Trouble in Little China, among several others, but by his own repeated account, he remained genuinely stung by how The Thing had been received for years afterward, long after the fact. The reversal started quietly, through home video and television, long before anyone was calling The Thing a masterpiece out loud in public. Away from the noise of a crowded 1982 summer, audiences discovering it later had room to actually sit with what Carpenter and Bottin had built, instead of reacting purely to the shock of it on a first watch. Today the film sits comfortably in the high 80s percentile on Rotten Tomatoes, a score built almost entirely from decades of retrospective reviews rather than the brutal notices it actually received back on release. It now regularly appears on lists of the greatest horror films ever made, and the ambiguous final scene, Macready and Childs, the last two survivors sitting in the wreckage with no way to prove either of them is still human, has fueled entire fan communities dedicated to debating exactly what happened next. A direct prequel, also titled The Thing, arrived in 2011, built specifically around the Norwegian camp briefly glimpsed destroyed at the very start of Carpenter's original film. The practical effects once called excessive are now treated as some of the finest creature work ever put on film. Here's my honest take. The Thing didn't fail because it was a bad movie. It failed because it showed up at exactly the wrong moment, sandwiched between a summer full of hope and a country that badly wanted more of it, not less. Carpenter built something patient, bleak, and completely uninterested in reassuring anybody, and for one summer, that was unforgivable to almost everyone who saw it. It just turned out that patience was exactly what the film needed people to eventually give back to it, decades later. Once the noise of 1982 faded for good, what was left underneath was one of the most influential horror films ever made, and every isolated group and Who's the Imposter story that's arrived since owes it something, whether it admits that debt or not. So here's my question for you: if you were trapped at that outpost, how would you actually tell who around you was still human? Tell me in the comments, I check every single one. If you're new here, and you haven't subscribed, do so now. New sci-fi and horror deep dives every week. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.